Welcome back. Welcome in. This is Country Roads Confidential at earsports.com, a CBS Sports podcast. I am Mike Casazza, ready to preview Saturday's home game, final home game for West Virginia and some number of other people. I'm talking about players, of course, Chris Anderson. Senior day at Mountaineer Field. Kansas State, number 17 in the country. Neil Brown says he ranked him higher than that on his polls. Respects the opponent here. Frankly, has to beat the opponent too.
Yes, he does. And I agree with him that maybe they should be ranked a little higher. I'm curious to see, we don't get to see the coaches poll till after the season is over. So we have no idea, no way of confirming that at this time. But it is a pretty good Kansas State team that is playing very well, even with a backup quarterback, which I'm sure we will talk about here in a bit.
So you and I joke a lot about how voting for all conference preseason poll, top 25s, it's actually the SIDs that vote, right?
That's what I was going to ask. I was like, who are we giving credit to here? Do we give it to Mike Montoro, SID? Do we go to Coleman Barnes, who is like, Neil's right-hand man? Who else do we think is in the running to put in a poll?
Dax Brown, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very, very confident Neil Brown does this and takes it seriously. I just don't see how he lets this escape him. Like, this is a privilege for him, and he wants to make sure that the coaches poll is treated with the dignity it respects. I could see him setting aside time.
I could. I mean, I'm the kind of weirdo that would, but I think we'd be in the minority. So,
have you ever voted top 25?
No.
Oh, it's brutal. I did basketball. It was rough. 3 times as many teams almost.
Yeah.
Granted, not many really matters. You can cut off about, 200 of them. But man, just trying to keep up on who's what. And then that was right about the time they started making them public. That's like a popular thing now is, publicize the votes. And all of a sudden Twitter gets really mad at the writer that disses their team. That was just starting when I did it. And I just said, no, thank you. I don't think I'll ever do that again. Football might be kind of fun because you know more about it now. It's easier to know more about teams than it was back in, man, it's been maybe 10, 11 years since I did the basketball poll. But yeah, football, probably easier.
Oh, I'm familiar with it because we used to I would put out a story. I think it was Monday or Tuesday. It was after the AP top 25 came out, back when West Virginia was getting ranked. And I would, hey, here's where they were ranked by most voters. Say they were ranked 17th, and it's kind of like a graph, out the line graph kind of thing. Like most of the voters are voting them 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and check it like, oh, and here are the outliers. This guy really loves them and puts them at 12th or 11th, and this guy doesn't even have them ranked. And I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting bit of information. It was an easy story to do, and I would do it every week. And I can't remember who was that. There was somebody, and I think he was in Oregon or something, and was just like, can you please stop? Because he put West Virginia, he had West Virginia. I think that, this was like one of the Will Greer years, and West Virginia was like 5th or 6th at the time in the poll. Like, they're definitely top 10. And he had him like 24th, 25th. Like, he didn't have them ranked until like they were inside the top 10. Just refused to believe the entire time.
Speaking of, 4 years ago, tomorrow, be Friday, right?
Mm-hmm.
West Virginia was number 12 in the country. 15 in the final regular season poll. 2 weeks later, has not been ranked since. So I'm glad you took that trip down memory lane about what it was like to critique the votes of a ranked West Virginia team. Don't have to tell you that. West Virginia has not played a game as a ranked team in a long, long time. Also, has not won 3 straight games in a long, long time. 3 in a row is what it will take for Brown to be bowl eligible. From 2001 through 2018, West Virginia missed a bowl twice. Could happen twice in Neil Brown's 4 seasons. You can only win one at a time. West Virginia had never beaten Oklahoma. Got that one. Now you get a ranked team at home. At Oklahoma State, which has won 7 in a row in the series. It's a tall task. There's some reason to believe that things are maybe creaking and breaking down with the team in Stillwater, and then Kansas State, backup quarterback, question marks. It's at Mountaineer Field. I guess if it's going to set up for a run, it could be a heck of a lot worse than this looks for West Virginia. It's not great, but it's not insurmountable, I don't think.
No, I think there was a podcast where you and I were discussing what was to come and how West Virginia was already struggling, and we weren't even sure that they had hit the toughest part of their schedule.
Mhm.
They still had TCU, Oklahoma, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, and it was that's a gauntlet to end the season. That is a gauntlet to end the season, especially if Dylan Gabriel's back and Oklahoma gets their feet back under him. That could be 4 or 5 games against top teams, and it's still tough. Like you said, Kansas State's on a backup quarterback who is playing well, and then Oklahoma State is, I don't know what they are. I mean, they lost a couple the worst games I think I've ever seen them play under Mike Gundy
Mhm.
in the last month. They struggled to beat Iowa State this past week. Had Spencer Sanders come out in the second half or second quarter. Yeah, didn't look great. He's coming back from injury, so you understand why. But this last stretch is not quite as hard as I think we thought it was just a month ago.
Let's begin with Kansas State, Chris, as we
Let's do
get
it.
into the preview here and start on offense. Gabe Eichert, former center for Oklahoma, he works for Oklahoma's game broadcasts, does some Sirius XM stuff as a host there too, has a tweet on November 12th. So Will Howard is just awesome now? We saw Will Howard in Morgantown 2 years ago.
Oh yeah.
It was not awesome. Chris, nobody in the history of Kansas State football has thrown 9 touchdown passes in 3 games. Will Howard has. What happened here? This is quite a bookending of Will Howard appearances at Mountaineer Field.
It is wild to think that it's the same guy who completed, I think, 50% of his passes and had 3 picks and looked absolutely flustered. I mean, I think he got sacked a couple times. His throws were all over the place. He couldn't hit open receivers, couldn't find open receivers. Like I said, 3 picks in that game and just an absolute blowout. West Virginia just whooped them in that game. And yeah, like you said, now here he is, completing 63% of his passes, 9 touchdowns, 1 interception, QBR over 90 every single game. That's 3 full. I mean, the TCU game wasn't a full game, but it was 3/4 of a game. So almost 3 full games now. So we're getting out of the small sample size category here, and this is kind of somewhat legit. Like he might actually have turned a corner.
When he played here in would have been 2020, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I talked to a coach who just was like, "Hey, how'd they do today?" And I said, "Oh, they won." That was kind of a surprise at the time. Oh, how'd the quarterback do? Because I think there was a question as to whether or not he was gonna, who was their starter back then? Was it was Skylar Thompson, right?
Yeah, they
So
weren't sure.
yeah, so I said, oh, the Howard kid played, and this person was very high on Will Howard, he's from Pennsylvania, not too far away. I think he had some fans in the stands, some friends and family too. But they said, no, this kid toolsy, just played for I guess underdeveloped was the word for his high school career. It's because never really got as far as high as that people thought he would be, but they said, man, he's going to be good if he's led properly, which again, coaching appears to be pretty good there. And what the offense is doing under Colin Klein's leadership, who is not renowned as a thrower, but he's nevertheless doing things with quarterbacks in the offense there is pretty good. It's not just Will Howard, Chris. We probably won't see Adrian Martinez, who's been excellent this season as well, too. Boy, if you can calibrate your quarterback position, you can have an offense that can awake from whatever vegetative state that the Kansas State offense had been, especially at that position the prior few years, and be much more potent a season like this. You're looking at 7.5 yards per attempt, 15 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, just 203 yards per game, but they're efficient. Their ratings are very good. they've been very good through the air this year. And again, almost no matter who has been the quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the passing numbers are going to be a little deflated because one, they don't run a lot of plays. Two, they run. They run and they run a lot. Not just the running backs, but also the quarterbacks. Martinez, like you said, had maybe 6 full games. Obviously got hurt in 2 different ones, and had only had about 200 some yards per game in those handful, but also was averaging almost 6 yards per carry and had 10 rushing touchdowns.
Mhm.
So it's obviously, as West Virginia fans saw last week, there's more to it than just putting up 300 passing yards in a game. If you can run for 100 or run for 70 and have a touchdown or something, that can really make up for that extra 100 or 200 yards passing.
This is the first time ever for Kansas State in the Big 12. That dates back to 1996 that they have had 375 or more yards in their first 7 conference games. That's not a huge number, 375, but to be consistently at and above that is good. I mean, West Virginia had barely, not even 200 against Iowa State a couple weeks ago. They're hitting that number and clearing it every time. They're averaging over 400 yards a game in their 10 games this season. And granted, that's inflated a little bit by an FCS game. And again, if you look at, obviously on the ground, people know what they can do there. They added the running back aspect at the quarterback position this year with Martinez. Howard doesn't run as much. Deuce Vaughn, we'll get to him. Let's just say he's back. But 64% completions is top 5 in school history. 1.09% interception rate is the lowest in school history. And they kind of score fast sometimes too. 14 touchdown drives of 5 plays or fewer, 3 pass plays, 60 or more yards, contributing to those drives. And that's not like the thumbprint of Kansas State football in the past. They're still doing what they've done before, but now a pass isn't a trick play. You know what I mean? Like they would seem like they would get you on some stuff when they did a pass play before, or it would be a very simple thing where someone might just break a tackle or something might blow up in the back end, but they're much more capable this year. And they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I would say, reputable receiving options. 2 receivers, 3 receivers, a running back, and a tight end.
Yeah, that having those extra receivers, I guess, with the running back, really, it's almost like the discussion. This is what makes it so difficult to defend them. Again, I guess I'll talk about it now, but they are not a team that breaks huge plays. They rank near the bottom in like 30+ yard plays. They're just not breaking too many big ones, but they're so difficult to defend, and they just get yardage every single time. And I think part of it is because, one, when they have a running quarterback, it's the same thing, the same positive you see with West Virginia last week with Garrett Green, where you have everyone accounted for. You have 11 guys you have to defend or block, or try to get past that are blocking you. So quarterback makes it tougher. And then you also, in the passing game, instead of just having kind of a running back that's just an extra blocker or is just back there, isn't really a threat, you have another threat in the receiving game as well. So it really makes it tough to defend them. And but the run because of a running quarterback and the pass because of a receiving running back.
Numbers on Howard, deep balls, 20 yards or more. He's 8 of 16, which is 50% is pretty good. 3 touchdowns, 4 big time throws on the 16 attempts, probably all completions there. So 4 of the 8 completed have been good. They can strike there too, but also the medium stuff too. You're talking 10 to 19 yards. That's 11 for 20. So when he stretches it out 10 yards or more, 19 to 36 is pretty good compared to what you've experienced in the past there too. And they have some game breakers too with who can catch the ball. They also happen to be special teams players too, which we'll get to, but their skill on the field, they've also developed a skill on special teams, punt returner, kickoff returner. Phillip Brooks, Malik Knowles, outside guy on Knowles, inside guy on Brooks. They make plays, and they have set things up to run vertical. They hardly throw screens, and which is maybe good news for West Virginia. Although West Virginia did defend screens a lot more aggressively and successfully against Oklahoma, but they've been picked apart with them this year. Don't expect to see a whole lot of that. Although maybe that's something that they pick on because West Virginia good at it once, not so good at it before. Let's see what the real deal is. But I guess we should probably just get to Vaughn in particular. one of the most fun players to watch in the country, I would say. Never mind Big 12, but he can just do so many things, runs, catches. He's an okay blocker too in the pocket, and they move him around. I'm not sure they necessarily hide him in formations, but they'll just put him in the slot and let him do some things. And there's not a lot of guys who get targeted deep down the backfield. He has been before. They run traditional stuff with him. Again, not a lot of screens on their offense too. So he's running routes out of the backfield that get him open up the field against linebackers or safeties, forces a lot of missed tackles. Undersized, sure. I would not call him small, though. Big legs, break some tackles, but I don't know. The Darren Sproles thing has been something for a couple of years. People have said that applies, which is probably very easy to reach for and embrace because of Kansas State. But Brown said Barry Sanders with some of the tackle breaking and the balance because of his big base that he has with his legs. Somewhere in between probably is Deuce Vaughn. Just a good player, fun to watch. And he's had a mixed bag of success against West Virginia. Not great 2 years ago, really, really good last year. And he's been terrific again this season, though.
I'm glad you went with him because there's a couple kind of fascinating trends, or well, at least trends that maybe could be exploited by West Virginia with Vaughn, at least lately. One of them has been tied to Will Howard at quarterback. In games where Adrian Martinez is the quarterback, Deuce Vaughn has about a 50-50 split in when they run like a zone scheme or a gap scheme. And they have a zone run versus a gap run. When it's a 71-67, so slightly more zone than gap, but basically 50-50. When Will Howard is the quarterback, in the 3 games where Will Howard has been the quarterback for Kansas State, it is now 3-1 in favor of gap scheme for Deuce Vaughn, 44-15. That is going to pull at one. I think I'm trying to figure out why, because that's what's fascinating me about this one, because typically you're changing your scheme because of the running back, the style of running back you have, or the style of offensive lineman you have, not because of the quarterback, unless the quarterback changes the dynamic of your offense. But is Will Howard that drastically different than Adrian Martinez? Like, I feel like they're both predominantly run quarterbacks that can pass the ball when they need to. So I don't think you change it for that. But it's a strange twist, because even when they came back to Martinez for the one game 2 weeks ago, it switched back to zone scheme. Again, almost a 50-50 split, and then came back to gap scheme when Will Howard was the quarterback. So that's something to keep an eye on. That's something that West Virginia's defensive front and front seven can scheme for and can plan for. It's going to put a lot of pressure on those edge guys, because the edge guys are going to be put into conflict on what to do when Vaughn is coming their way. And edge guys, linebackers, they're really going to have to make some decisions. Obviously, you're always going to have to when you face Deuce Vaughn, but it's just strange to me that they changed the whole scheme. And hey, those people that get paid a lot more than me to coach football, they could probably figure out some reason why and how to exploit that.
My armchair analysis here, Chris, would be that they probably did a lot of RPO stuff with Martinez, which can be zone based. You can do power behind it, don't get me wrong, but I wonder if with Howard now, it's just more quarterback power and counter plays, and then that Vaughn could just fit into that. Also, I really like him behind counters, and if you look at like what Oklahoma did last week, pulling their guards and tackles, or when West Virginia has pulled centers and tackles this year, I like that with a smaller guy like him who's explosive. Don't get me wrong, but behind those big guys who are moving, because all of a sudden you got to find him, and someone who's that good, that fast, that strong, that hard to get down, he's on you fast. That's not fair, right? 37 forced missed tackles this year by him. That's going to be up there for, again, a guy who you'd think is small is going to go down easily, maybe try to get out of bounds. No, he takes plays on. He's pretty good there too. Howard only runs 17 times this year, 3 games. And then again, obviously, if your starter's hurt, you really have to be careful how much you run your quarterback who's healthy. So that has been something I'm sure they monitor with him too. But the other thing is too, is that Vaughn becomes a little bit easier to combat when you don't have to devote eyes and defenders to the running back. So he's been okay without it, don't get me wrong, but I wonder if that might be something they try to spice up a little bit this week, get him going too. What do you think of their receivers here, Chris? Game breakers and the special teams aspect that have become I mean, really potent receivers here too. Again, relative to the success of their passing game, it's good. Their numbers aren't tremendous, but these are guys who can open up and run by some people too.
Yeah, I think it's important to put some context around it because big picture, it's not a very explosive offense. They rank, near around 100th in the country
Mhm.
in 30 plus yard plays from scrimmage, period, even lower in pass plays. But they also don't run a lot of plays. They rank 100th in the country out of 131 teams in pace of play. So they're playing fewer plays, they're getting fewer big plays, but maybe their rate is about the same as other people or a little better than you might think. So when they are running plays, guys are making it. They're wide receivers. They got some decent ones. Knowles, Brooks, those guys can get downfield. They can catch the short ones and they can get downfield a little bit. Knowles gets a little bit more yards after the catch than Brooks does, but both of them, their average depth of target is around 10 yards downfield. So again, they're not catching too many quick little hitters and then trying to get stuff in space. They're actually running legitimate routes and getting downfield and forcing guys to tackle them once they make that catch.
Two guys to watch: Cade Warner, Kurt Warner's son, the one who's not playing quarterback at Temple, has become a really good player for them. Lately, too, he's been hard to stop. Last 3 games, 14 catches, 175 yards, 3 touchdowns. He leads the team with 5 touchdown receptions. He's been open a bit. He just kind of runs routes all over the field. He can get deep, but you're talking for the season now, 30 catches, 348 yards again, 5 touchdowns. And man, I hate to do this. Ben Sinnott, tight end. Kansas State tight ends are always good. West Virginia, I think just because it's a gag, sometimes we talk about how good the tight ends are. I thought they did a really good job against Brennan Willis last week for Oklahoma, trying to make sure he didn't get free up the seam. Now, upon rewatch, I was wondering why after the game they didn't get him involved more. Well, they covered him. So good for them. Anyways, Ben Sinnott, 6'4", good receiver, blocker too. Last game, 7 catches, 89 yards, 2 scores. He had 7 catches for about 80 yards and no scores in the prior 5 games. So another option there to look at. And again, if you match up with West Virginia's defense, sometimes you say, hey, might be able to do some things there too. Interesting thing about Kansas State here, there's something called the Eckel rate, which is basically, I guess the guy named Eckel came up with this, but what it does is it measures how many quality possessions you have per game. There's things involved there about relative to field position, how much you move it, do you flip the field, first downs, whatever, right? But Kansas State only 47% of the time has a productive possession. They get 4.8 points per productive possession. The 47.8%, number 82 in the country, so pretty close to the bottom, 131 teams. But the 4.82 points, number 16 in the country. So they don't get a lot of possessions that are productive, but when they do, they make them count. This sounds as simple as third down success, but also first down success. And here's where things are weird. They're not very good on third and fourth down. 38% of the time, number 97 in the country, third and fourth down success. They were 1 for 5 on third down in a loss to Tulane. They've had some 1-fers on third down this season too. However, they're a top 25 team when it comes to getting first downs on first down. I don't know where to go with this. These are extremes to me. Like, they're not always productive on offense, but when they are, they're very productive. I would assume this would be, hey, get in their backfield, make negative plays. Let's see if their passing game can do it. Don't let Deuce Vaughn run wild. But there's something there. Like, this is not an inconquerable offense. You're right, Chris. They do not have explosive plays. They do drive on people. They do have the 14 touchdown drives of 5 plays or fewer. They have many more that were longer drives too, which is kind of indicative of the stat I'm talking about here. So how do you get them into not productive possessions? And then if they do start to move it, they're going to have to find a way to limit the points. One thing is that West Virginia's red zone defense has been better lately. I'm going to write about that later in the week. It's not great, but it's been better. And Kansas State 2 years ago, one of the best red zone offenses in the country. They've been pretty average last 2 seasons.
The I love that you brought that up about the plays and how it happens and what happens, because it was, I think, was the last game or 2 games ago? I think the first handful of drives, I was like, something's not making sense here, because West Virginia's first down plays were, 6 yards, 5 yards, 6 yards, 10 yards, 6 yards. Yet they couldn't sustain a drive. And it was like, how can you have success on first down and, put yourself in more manageable, you should be putting yourself in more manageable third downs, and you should be sustaining drives, except West Virginia would follow up a decent play to a good play with a negative play or a zero play. And that's just not something that Kansas State does. They are one of the best teams in the country in tackles for loss allowed, like how often they get tackled behind the line of scrimmage. They are one of the best teams in the country in sacks allowed. Will Howard, according to what I'm looking at right now, has not officially been sacked in his 3 games, not once. They allow opposing teams on average only get 3 tackles per loss per game this year. So, you think back to the situations I'm talking about with West Virginia, where like, oh, they go forward 6 yards, but then, they go backwards 5 because of a penalty, and then they throw an incomplete, and all of a sudden it's 3rd and 11. That's not happening to Kansas State. They're getting 6 and then 2 and then 2 or whatever, and they're keeping it going. And again, they don't have great success on 3rd down, like you said. Like, they're not amazing at it, but they're just not moving backwards and not putting themselves in a bad position, which I think is part of the reason why their offense is, when you look at a lot of the other metrics, you're like, how is this offense working? And a lot of it is they just don't have negative plays.
I will save everybody the agony here and not recite West Virginia's rankings and percentages for Eckel and for first down success and 3rd and 4th down success. We'll instead flip Chris to the Kansas State defense here. This does seem like what we're familiar with when it comes to Kansas State. They have a pass rusher, they have veterans. It's not a ton of junior college guys, but they're big in the secondary again too. They force a lot of turnovers here, 13 interceptions, I believe, one of the top numbers in the country. Have a great pass rusher that we mentioned with Felix. We'll just say he's very good. I'll get his name right here in a minute here.
Anaduke Azoma.
Zoma, okay, yeah. I don't know. This is a formidable team, and again, all the rankings here. Again, there's nothing that makes you go, "Oh man, they're really impressive." Except that when it comes to like discipline stats, or when it comes to a time or a moment where they have to really be good, they are. But they can be had too. They've given up some point totals this year. Presuming Garrett Green's a starter here, where does he begin? Where does West Virginia begin?
Well, I think, again, this is going to be another situation where it might be best if Garrett Green is a starter, or having a mobile quarterback as a starter. You mentioned Anadoke Azoma. I remember, I think it was last year, right? Or 2 years ago, where did he just break the single game record for most sacks in a game?
It was 6 that got amended to 3 or something. Wasn't it crazy like that?
Yeah, exactly. And it was just like, hey, whatever the number is, whether it was 6 sacks or, because one of them was like a sack, but then it ended up being a fumble and the ball went forward. So then it just became a regular tackle for loss instead of a sack, and just stupid stuff like that. But know in your mind that he had 6 sacks or 7 sacks, whatever it was. And he's still good. He's still amazing. He is 2nd in the Big 12 with 35 pressures on the quarterback. He is 3rd in the Big 12 in win rate, which is when he goes one-on-one with an opposing blocker and in a pass set and wins that battle. He is 3rd in the entire Big 12 conference. And that this is just going to put a bright, big spotlight on Wyatt Milam at left tackle, because while some defensive linemen, flip sides, they flip, not really inside out, but left side, right side, strong side, weak side. That's not the case with Kansas State, or at least not the case with Uzoma, because almost 90% of his snaps come lined up right over the left tackle. So 90% of the time he is going to be facing off against Wyatt Milam on Saturday afternoon. And 90% of the time, Wyatt Milam is going to have to bring his A game, because that is going to be a matchup to watch, because he is a guy that wreaks havoc in the backfield. And whether it's in the passing game, or he could just obviously disrupt the run by getting pressure back there. So that is, I can tell you right now, And Adoke Uzoma versus Wyatt Milam is going to be one of my 3 key matchups, and maybe number 1 in the 3 keys later this week.
There might be 2 of the 3 keys too. How about that?
Yeah.
Their run defense is not great. I don't know why that it looks like it's fine on paper. Rushing defense, 61 in the country, 143.8. However, man, 220 against Oklahoma, 215 against TCU, 269 against Texas. That's 2 of their losses in a shootout that they got into. There's something there too. Granted, they can also shut a team out like they did against Oklahoma State, 54 yards rushing, 78 against Iowa State, 160 against Tulane. It's interesting. Also, again, they lost 17-10, but is there something to their success? I guess, how about this? What is it when they are bad that makes them bad? Is it the opponent? Is it a scheme? Is there something common with those big numbers that I mentioned there?
That's a good question. I was hoping you'd tell me.
Okay. Gabriel runs at Oklahoma,
Yep.
right? He did not have it against West Virginia in the same regard last week, but that's a guy who can open up and go. So you're like, all right, well, let's see. What's the deal here? West Virginia's going to have Garrett Green. What are they going to do? 61 yards against Kansas State. That's not impressive. So what is that? I don't know. Then you go, okay, well, what about TCU? Max Duggan. That's a runner. We've seen him do some things. They're very good on the ground. They get a ton of yards. Well, Duggan hasn't run a whole lot this year. Wonder what he did against Kansas State. 15 carries, 13 yards. All right, well, Texas. Well, that's just Bijan Robinson. So that'll happen there too. It's not a quarterback thing, but they can get beat up sometimes by running backs, and it looks like by multiple running backs too. And I just think like sticking to it, that has hurt them when it has happened too. They're not huge up front. They play a 3-3-5 now. That used to be an even front, all the time before. They always had like those big guys that could rotate in the middle with their ends that kind of pinched or crashed or whatever. A little different now. 3-3-5 has been good to them though. Since they did it, they've been averaging fewer than 19 points allowed. Fewer than 20 points allowed, 19 and a half since the start of last season. Their rushing defense has been good. I think similar to a lot of the stuff here too. Like I mentioned, 60s in rush defense, pretty average number. When they're bad, they're bad. But when they're good, no one really does stuff against them too. They can have bad days, but they're able to cover it up too. West Virginia, Green, sure. Mathis, Johnson, maybe Anderson. None of them was great last week. Perhaps they all get to go here and try to make this work. I think you kind of have to swing the axe and see if you can maybe knock that over at some point.
Looking back in their secondary, I'm curious what happens with Kobe Savage out. Their starting strong safety suffered a knee injury last week and is supposed to, I believe he's done for the season. Not going to be back for Saturday. I don't believe, at least not as of the time that we're recording this. And the options behind him currently on the depth chart. Yeah. So he's not even on the depth chart anymore. He's been removed from the depth chart. And in his place is the good old fashioned TJ Smith and Sincere Mason. Mason's been playing a good bit as kind of that 5th, 6th, nickel corner slot guy that comes in. Decent in coverage, but the second highest missed tackle rate among their defensive players. And then the other option, TJ Smith, who played his most snaps last game, which was the game that Savage got hurt in. And he's been picked on a little bit in the secondary. The completion rate is not high. I think it's only a little over 50%, but opposing teams have got into the end zone on him, have broke some big plays on him when he's in coverage. So I'll be curious to see if and or how West Virginia tries to pick on that position on Saturday.
About 80% zone. So not a lot of man for West Virginia there too. And listen, they can get cracked. They can get anything can happen against them too. But they don't have anybody who's given up more than 2 touchdowns. Highest completion percentage for somebody who's been, I would say, in coverage a lot. I'm not talking linebackers, but you have to go way down the list here too. Josh Hayes, 62% of the time. But that's not bad for a corner, especially when you're playing a lot of zone too. You're going to give up some catches there and just going to rally and make the play too. But they get their hands on balls, they intercept passes. For the season here, the pass breakups, you have a lot of players and multiple ones. Interceptions, again, one of the tops in the country. Kobe Savage leads the way with 3. Julius Brents, Sincere Mason, Daniel Green, they all have 2. They have guys who do stuff in that zone that are active. Good secondary. It'll be a test for West Virginia's receivers to be a little bit better than they were last week. Let's wrap it up, Chris. You ready?
Yep.
Sometime Saturday evening, we meet, we talk. What are we talking about to explain the outcome here?
I think this might be the most options we've had for a game on who or what we talked about. I think every time we come into this segment, I'm down to one or two people that it's going to be a discussion about. If they win, I think we're talking about Garrett Green again, because I think he's going to be a part of it, and not just because of his feet, but because he's going to be asked to throw. And so I think we will be discussing him if they win. If they lose, we're going to be looking at that defensive line. It's going to be on them to kind of pick up the pieces and try to handle that rushing attack from Kansas State, trying to keep up with Deuce Vaughn. And well, no, let's not say them, because they're going to be occupied with blockers. I'm going to look at like Lee Koba, extra low. How many missed tackles do they have trying to get their hands on a guy like Deuce Vaughn? So there's my two-pronged answer.
I'll stick with quarterbacks. I'll go the other side. Is Will Howard awesome? I don't know. I've seen the numbers. I've seen a little bit of him play. The offense is different when Martinez is in, because you have that running threat. He's not explosive. The offense isn't explosive. West Virginia's defense has played better. It is bent. It hasn't bent as much. It's been okay in the red zone, better in the red zone, not great. It does give up big plays, but Kansas State doesn't really aim for the stars on offense. I wonder if they can keep driving against West Virginia's defense, which sounds like such a strange thing. But if you look at things, teams haven't really done that of late. It has happened, small samples. We're not talking about going way, way back, but it's been better. If Howard is awesome, then he wins this game because he found ways to do it. He's coached up. He made it happen. Does he run a little bit? Does he hit some plays? We'll see. But if Will Howard is, version 2020, it's a different story. And then probably West Virginia has a really good chance at this here too. Wildcard Vaughn, is he 2021? Is he 2020 Vaughn against West Virginia? That probably goes without saying. Plenty more coming up on the site. There's a whole lot going on behind the scenes, as you know. Athletic director search, question marks about the status of the head football coach. Neil Brown can probably submit a CB in some form or fashion with a win or a loss on Saturday. I'm ready to go. How about you, Chris?
I am. Let's real quick on that one, on that topic right there. Let's go ahead and answer for everybody. We are not expecting any surprises Saturday night after the game, regardless of outcome. Correct?
Grab the Dr. Pepper, Chris.
Okay. Because, I was worried about it, and they came out and they said, they're not making any decisions till they hire an athletic director. I do not expect them to hire an athletic director in the next 48 hours. But you never know, man. People say all sorts of things, as we know. But I think it's, they're going to stick true to their word on this one, because I just don't, there's no point in making a move without an athletic director. So
until then, I'm Mike Casaza.
And I'm Chris Anderson.
We'll talk to you then.